Hi, I'm Andy Jones, Content Editor for Plaid's online education program, Let's Paint. In today's studio lesson, we're going to paint a dramatic bird's nest. We've got some interesting techniques that we're going to use. To create our graded background, we're going to use FolkArt Blending Gel to allow us plenty of time to work. We'll use a dry brush technique as well as floated color to create our eggs, and then a really fun technique using a palette knife to create the twigs of the nest. Come on, let's paint. To begin the painting, we're going to create a graded background on our canvas. I did my painting on a 12 by 12 gallery wrapped canvas. So I'm going to begin by mixing some Prussian blue into some burnt umber. I'm using FolkArt Acrylics. I want to create a very dark brownish black color. You don't want to use just black because that is almost dead. You want this color to have some interest to it. So just mixing Prussian blue and burnt umber, creating a rich, deep brown color. And if you're wondering what the color looks like, you can just spread some out very thin on your palette and you get a good indication of what your color looks like. So I'm pretty happy with that color. So I'm going to pick up a large flat brush and I'm going to use FolkArt Blending Gel. I want to use the FolkArt Blending Gel to extend the drying time of my paint. It gives me plenty of time to blend my background. So I'm going to brush this on, starting on the light edge of the canvas, and just brush this all the way from edge to edge using long light strokes, getting myself geared up for how I'm going to blend this background. If I need to pick up a little more gel, do that, and begin to brush this on. I don't want the canvas to have too much gel on it, but I want it to have enough to allow me to blend and move the color easily. So a nice thin coat of blending gel, adding just a little as I need it. Now I'm going to pick up my brownish black color on my brush, picking up plenty of paint, and I'm going to start on the dark side of my canvas, and I'm just going to brush this on. Don't worry about getting it on the edge of the canvas because you're going to paint that later. But now, brushing from top to bottom, I'm just going to begin to move this color across the canvas. If it's awkward to blend up and down like this, you can, of course, turn your canvas to where it's comfortable and blend across. You want to carry some of this dark color all the way to the edge. Now, I'm going to wipe my brush off. I'm going to pick up some more of my dark shading color. I'm going to again start over on the dark edge of the canvas, and I'm going to stroke from top to bottom all the way across the canvas. What I want to do is to create a gradation of color from dark to light and have it be nice and even. I'm going to wipe my brush again, getting rid of any excess color that's on the brush, and I'm just going to soften this color back and forth. You've got plenty of time to work with this before it's going to dry on you, but you want to have a nice gradation from light to dark. Remember to go all the way from edge to edge so that you don't have stop and start marks across your canvas. And for this painting, we're doing the hardest part first. If you're doing this and it starts to dry or you're unhappy with the way yours looks, don't worry about it. Dip a rag into some water, wash your canvas off, and start again. You haven't messed anything up. Long light strokes from top to bottom, working across the width of the canvas. All right. I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to stop working now. If you're working with me at home, stop now and allow your canvas to dry completely. Our background is dry. I painted the edges of mine with the dark color that we used on the graded part. I have transferred my design onto the surface. I used the chalk method to transfer this design onto the surface. Use just enough to let you know where your design is. I transferred a little bit of the nest, the eggs, and a suggestion of where my background is starting. All right, this particular painting has a lot of negative space in it, meaning there's a lot of the canvas that isn't actually painted. Most of the background is already done for us. We're not going back and adding in a lot of detail to the background. I want to create a dull aqua color. So I'm using FolkArt Aqua. I'm going to pull a little bit aside, wipe my palette knife. I'm going to pick up a little bit of burnt umber and I'm going to mix that in with the aqua just to tone the color down so that it's not too bright. The brightest part of our painting are going to be the eggs. So we want everything else to be a little bit duller than our eggs. So I'm adding some burnt umber to the aqua, wipe my palette knife off, and I'm going to add some titanium white to create a lighter value. So I've got a dark dull aqua and now I'm making a light dull aqua. Okay, we're going to start by painting the inside of our nest. So I'm going to pick up my dark dull aqua and I'm going to paint a little bit around my egg, roughly inside the back of the nest a little bit. I'm going to pick up some of my lighter color that I just made and I'm going to brush that on and just mix the two together. Nothing difficult about this. Now I'm going to pick up a little bit of titanium white and just kind of with my dirty brush lighten that, and I'm going to add a little bit of light into the back part of the nest, and I'm just going to leave that just like that. Don't blend it all in, don't blend it away. Now I'm going to pick up some of my blending gel medium and just the paint that was left over on my brush, which is some of the aqua, and I'm going to start along this little suggestion of a background area, and I'm going to put my brush down and flick the color up. This is going to be a very loose suggestion of a background. I'm going to add a little bit of titanium white to my brush back in the blending gel medium, just making this a little bit more transparent. So I've lightened my color, I've made it transparent. I'm going to take a little bit of the excess off my brush and I'm going to add just a little bit of a highlight, and that's it, no more. Don't play in it, don't mess around with it. Now I want to base coat my 3 eggs, and I want that to be a bright, lively blue color. So I'm going to start with some brilliant ultramarine, add some Prussian blue to it, almost equal parts, and wipe my palette knife, and I'm going to add just a little bit of white to this. Need to add a little bit more white to brighten that color up just a little bit more. Always be in the habit of wiping your palette knife off when you've finished mixing a color. That way, if you go into another pile of paint, you won't contaminate it by having a dirty palette knife. That's a beautiful color. All right, so wipe my palette knife off before I put it away. And then I'm going to load my brush, always pulling the paint away into a loading zone, loading both sides of the brush, and I'm going to move this so it's a little easier for me to paint, and simply base coat the egg. Then I'm going to move to the 2 eggs on the foreground, and we're going to base coat those, paying attention to the edge so that it's nice and smooth. Generally, bird eggs do not have fuzzy edges, so make sure that your edges are nice and crisp and clean. Take your time and work neatly and carefully. In this particular painting, the only thing that you really have to worry about the shape of are these 3 eggs. Everything else is going to be very loose and free-form, but the eggs need to be egg-shaped and have crisp, clean edges. And 1 more egg to go. Again, always be comfortable to move your surface or your canvas so that you're comfortable as you paint. And the back side of my egg there is a little misshapen. So I'm going to take the time right now to make sure I get it nicely painted so that it really looks like an egg. Okay, just want to make sure that my eggs are all completely opaque. So if you need to give it a quick second coat, you can do that. Okay, now want to make sure that I get a little color on the front of the nest. So I'm going to pick up a little blending gel and some of my teal color and a little bit more burnt umber because I want it to be a little darker. So I'm using aqua plus burnt umber. And I'm just brush mixing this together. And I just want to, that's not quite dark enough. Add a little bit more burnt umber. And just want to add this to the front of the nest. And as I move over to the darker edge, I'm going to add a little bit more burnt umber to it. And that's the front of the nest. Just that easy. Now, if you're painting along, this would be a good time to let everything completely dry so that your eggs are dry and all of the nest in the background is completely dry. All right, we're going to add some light area that's between our eggs and our nest. And I'm just going to take a dirty brush and pick up some white on one half of the brush like I was side loading. But I don't want this to be very wet. So I'm almost side loading with a dry brush. I'm going to start where I want this to be the brightest. And I'm just bringing this down toward the shadow area and just brushing some of this light color toward the nest. And I'm usually stroking toward me because that's just the most comfortable way for me to paint. I'm going to make that just a little bit brighter. And then so I'm stroking toward me again, I'm going to turn my canvas around so that as I add it to this area, I'm still stroking toward me and then carrying this light color over towards the nest. Don't get too hung up on what this is. It's just a change in value from the background. We're just working in some light color so that we have some contrast in our painting. We want some light values and some dark values. I want this to be the brightest right in there. So just pat that on there and then stop. Now, we're going to add dark shading to our eggs. I'm going to rinse my brush out and I'm going to side load with some Prussian blue and I can use some of my background color to make a really, really dark, interesting blue color. And I'm going to apply the color where one egg goes behind something. So where this egg dips behind the nest, I'm going to add my dark shading, apply the color in a patting motion. I don't want a solid line of dark color. I want that line to have some variation in width and color, so that's why I pat the paint on. I'm going to turn this away, and I'm going to add a little additional dark color at this end of the egg. And again, just pat that color on, giving some variety. Going to add dark shading where this egg is behind the other one. Again, apply the color with a nice patting motion. This is where practice with your side loading comes into play. If you've been practicing, then this should be very easy for you to apply the shading. I want to continue this dark up this edge just a little bit. So I'm going to start on the chisel edge of my brush and then apply more pressure and pat that color on, and that creates a nice dark area. Adding a little more dark, patting that on. Then we can add a little bit of dark up this way and then pat to soften that color so we don't have a harsh line. A little more water to my brush, Still the same Prussian blue and the dark bluish black color we used for our background. And I'm going to add lots of dark color at the bottom edge of the egg. Again, pat this color on so that you don't have a harsh line. Take your time, move your canvas around so that it's easy and convenient for you. Want it to be comfortable as you paint. If I'm working faster than you are, stop the video, catch up, and then restart the video. I've had a lot more experience doing this, so it's easier for me, but it's not a competition. I want you to learn how to paint because it can bring a lifetime of enjoyment to you. All right, so we've got some background going. We've got dark shading on there. We need to let the shading on our eggs dry before we start to highlight them. So you can pause your video and let your eggs dry too. All right. We're going to begin to highlight our 3 eggs, and we're going to do this using a dry brush technique. If you need a refresher course in a dry brush technique, you can refer back to our Skill Builder series, and there's an entire video teaching this technique in depth. I'm going to begin with the same blue color that I base coated my eggs with. I'm going to load my brush and take off the excess paint. I'm using a filbert brush, and I'm just going to begin to brush this color on, and got a little too much paint on my brush. So using a sparse amount of paint, I just want to soften back over the shading line where it meets the base coat color. This is just going to soften the color just a little bit. And we're going to repeat the same process on all the eggs. And if I were painting this at home, I would repeat each step on all 3 eggs before I moved on to the next step. So we're just softening this line of shading right along there. We just want to soften that a little bit with our undercoat color. What we want to do is to create a nice tonal gradation, and we do that with a dry brush technique, allowing our eye to blend the colors together. So sparse amount of paint, a light touch, and just skim the paint across the shaded area. All right, now that we've softened our shading, we're going to begin to develop the lighter areas of the eggs. So I'm going to take this base color and I'm going to add a very small amount of titanium white to it. I want to raise the value a little bit. It may take you a minute to get the color just right. Don't worry about that. Take your time. Pay attention to what you're doing. So I'm going to check the color on the egg. That seems just a little bit too bright to me, so I'm going to add some more of my base coat color. Take the excess paint off my brush, and it's very difficult to judge the color that I've created on my palette to what it is on my painting. So that's why you have to stop and check each time. All right, so that color looks nice. So I'm starting where I want my highlight to be the brightest, and I'm just going to stretch this color out, letting it fade away. This will become therapeutic as you paint. So starting where we want our highlight to be the brightest, and then letting the color fade away using a light touch and a sparse amount of paint on the brush. You're going to get tired of hearing me say that, but I'm trying to reinforce the technique for you. We're going to start where we want our highlight to be the brightest, sparse amount of paint, let the paint just skim across the surface. If you're painting away and you can't see anything that's happening, you might have run out of paint, or your paint might be too close in value. You need to constantly evaluate what's happening on your painting. One thing I want to caution you against is trying to compare your painting at this stage to the finished picture. You're not there yet. It's going to take you a minute to get there. You will, but just keep working slowly and steadily, adding a little bit of white to my blue. Want a lighter value. I need to check the color on my painting. It's a nice light color. Going to take the excess paint off my brush. Start where I want my highlight to be the brightest. Use a sparse amount of paint and a light touch, and we'll just develop the form of the egg. Continue on all of the eggs, doing the same step to each egg before moving on to the next step. It's kind of like you're tickling your painting when you're doing this. You shouldn't have too much paint on the brush. You should just let the paint slide off as you get more comfortable with this technique, it'll become faster and faster for you. You're going to start looking at things that you see around your house, and you're going to notice the value change in things. You might see a picture sitting on a table, and you'll be like, oh, look, it goes from light to dark over there. He really was right. You can see the form created through value changes. So again, just a little bit lighter each value, a little bit smaller area. We're not striving for perfection. All we ever want is a pleasing painting. There's no such thing as mine doesn't look as good as yours, or I messed this up. Remember, you're painting because you enjoy it. It should be a fun experience for you. You can see as we develop these highlights, the eggs begin to take on a much more three-dimensional rounded shape. Never think about how long it's taking you to paint something. Some people always ask, oh, how long did it take you to paint that? And usually what I remember about painting is not how long it took me, but how much fun I had doing it. Like I remember painting that, oh yeah, it was so much fun, developing the background and the eggs and the sticks in the nest. Not, how long it took, because that's irrelevant. You should paint and enjoy every minute of it. One thing you're going to find as you continue exploring how to paint is painting is like a little vacation that you give yourself. You can't really think about other things while you're painting. All the little distractions of the day are going to disappear from your mind, and all you're going to think about is what's happening right in front of you at the end of your paintbrush. Unless you have a big dog, and then you'll notice your big dog trying to get in your lap. That's hard to ignore, but you can try. It's all about the enjoyment of creating a painting. Just adding a little bit more white each time, making the highlights a little bit brighter. Each highlight covers a smaller area until you're down to a pure white highlight on each of the eggs. And don't just have it be just a dot of white. It needs to have a little character to the shape. All right, if you're painting along, give yourself a minute to catch up to where we are now. You can pause your video, finish highlighting your eggs, and then we'll come back and start adding the twigs to our nest. All right, while my eggs were drying, I took a minute to clean up my palette. I knew I was going to need some extra space to work with. So I got rid of what I didn't need, and I kept my dark shading color, which is a mixture of Prussian blue and burnt umber. That's what we used originally to do our graded background. I have burnt umber, burnt sienna, pure orange, and titanium white on my palette. I'm going to start by using a filbert brush and some of my dark shading color, and we're going to start painting sticks. And this is going to throw some of you off a little bit because we're not painting a lot of really tiny, fine little twigs. These were hardy birds that built this nest, and it's a substantial nest. So I'm just going to start by laying on some twigs. And notice that I'm holding my brush way back on the handle so I don't have a lot of control over the brush. And I'm laying the brush down and just letting it drag on. So don't be afraid. We're just painting some twigs. Just picking up more paint as I need it. Just dragging it on. Letting the brush rest on the surface of the canvas. Just want to create a little bit of motion and give some direction to the nest. We're going to add lots of color into this, so don't worry yet. There'll be plenty of time to worry later on, but right now, just add some strokes of this dark color. Want to add some that are coming into the aqua portion of the background. Just breaking up that space a little bit. This is just building the foundation of the shape of the nest. Just relax. Some of these you'll want to have a little bit longer. Some of them are going to be shorter. Just make some twigs just to give a little bit of shape to our nest to begin with. Okay, now that we've established the basic shape of our nest, I do want to break this up just a little bit there, and maybe a little bit down there like that. All right, I'm going to set that brush aside, and I'm going to pick up a palette knife. Now this is a little bit different than the palette knife that I use to mix my paint with. This is a plastic palette knife, and it's a little bit thicker than the thin metal blade palette knife, and this is going to work nicely to lay on some of our twigs. So I'm going to pick up a little burnt umber. This is why I needed some room on my palette. I'm picking up some paint. You can see I've got quite a bit of paint on there, and I'm just going to lay this down and let the paint fall off the palette knife. Don't be afraid. You're not going to mess this up. We're just dragging on some brown twigs. You want to go the other way, you can do that too. You're not going to mess anything up with this. You can't put it on the right way or the wrong way. You just need to put some twigs on. Some of them are going to create some more interesting shapes. Others are going to be more linear. It's all fine. Just add and keep building. You're the little bird in charge of your own nest here. Keep thinking different shapes, different directions, having fun with this. Now you're thinking to yourself, how easy is that? It's super easy to do. Lots of fun. You need to let something drag way out at the bottom, you can do that. Want something more up in the nest, that's fine too. You can only plan so much of what's going to happen with this, applying it with the palette knife. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to pick up some burnt sienna. And what we're building up to is we're going to add some rusty twigs, and in just a minute I'm going to add some bright orange twigs. And I want to do that because orange is the complementary color of blue. It's going to make it have color contrast, it's going to be dramatic, it's going to be artistic, and it's going to add that little zing that our bird's nest needs. Oh, that was really nice how that trailed across there. Going to have some pleasant surprises as you do this. And again, we're just letting the palette knife really do all of the work for you. You're not having to struggle to paint all of this. Like I said, I'm just going to wipe my palette knife clean. If you were using a thin blade metal knife, you wouldn't have the twigs that have this sort of dimension to them. So here we go. Be brave. Loading up the palette knife with some orange, and this is going to seem really bright when you put it on. But you just have to be brave and add that kind of zing of orange on there. This is and I'm not going to put too much on there, but this is the kind of stuff that really makes a painting sing. You need this kind of extreme color contrast. And I'm trying to figure out exactly where I want to put this next one, just to have a little bit of blue closer up to the orange. I don't want to add too much, just a little bit right there. Okay, that's all the orange I'm going to put on there. So now I need to build up some light twigs on this. Really, really like the way that orange is adding a little pop of color there. So I'm going to mix a little burnt umber and some titanium white together to make a nice kind of chocolate brown color. Well, it's not even chocolate brown. It's I don't know, maybe like a milk chocolate color or a hot cocoa color. And I'm going to lay on some highlights. And we're just building this up little bit by little bit, and you can still see some of the aqua color that we laid in the foundation of our bird's nest with. And I'm going to add a little bit more white to this mix. So I want some lighter twigs. We'll kind of consider these highlight twigs, if you will. A little bit of a highlight right there in front of that egg. There we go. Now that bright highlight twig right in front of that dark egg really sets the egg back into the nest because of the light-dark contrast that we have going on there. And this is all kinds of stuff that you're not really thinking about. I just want to point this stuff out to you so that when it happens on your painting, you're not surprised. Okay, going to add a little bit of some lightness over here. And maybe a little bit coming up there. Now, I'm not really thrilled with the way that looks. So, in order to get rid of it, I'm going to wipe my palette knife clean. And there's nothing really wrong with that. It's just an awkward V shape there, which isn't terribly attractive. So I'm going to pick up some of the original dark color that I started with, and we're just going to cover up some of that. Maybe give it another pass this way. And there we don't have that sharp V point there anymore. You can even break it up more. Going across there, there. Okay, I think that's nicely twigged. So at this point, because we have so much dimensional paint on here, and I still need to add some shadowing to my painting, it's a good time to pause your video and let this step completely dry before we move on. All right, now that our nest is dry, we need to add the shadows for our eggs, and then I want to show you how to add a shadow for the nest and also how to set the nest into the shadow so that it's married into the background. So I'm going to use a large flat brush, and I'm going to side load with the original background color, which is a mixture of burnt umber and Prussian blue. And to that, because I want really, really bold contrast, I'm going to add just a little bit of black. Now, I don't ever want you to use black by itself in a case like this, because that's just going to make a hole in the canvas. It's going to just suck all of the life out of it. So just adding a little black to darken up our original background color that we started with. So I've got my brush side loaded, and I'm just going to start right here next to where I've added that light in the background, and I'm going to come and put the color right up next to the egg, and because I'm putting dark next to dark, it's going to disappear. And then I'm going to wipe the excess paint off my brush, and I'm just going to gently blend and soften this shadow out into the background. It's just a nice suggestion of a cast shadow, and that's really all you need there. For the shadow of the nest, we're going to kind of do this in two parts. Again, side loading with the original background color, which is a mixture of Prussian blue and burnt umber. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this dark color and I'm going to start just below the nest, and I'm going to blend some of this dark color up into the nest. And it's just going to soften the edge of the nest a little bit. And over here, just adding a little extra dark color where I wasn't really pleased with that point of triangle, or pointed triangle. Now you can see that I've just made that disappear. So just stroking this on. Then I'm going to add a little more water to my brush, blend it out on the palette, and then I'm going to turn my attention toward the bottom of the canvas. First I went up into the nest with this dark color, And now I've flipped my brush over and we're going into just the bottom of the canvas. And because I added a little bit of black over there, I'm going to add a little bit of black to my brush. Just going to turn this, and we're just going to add this extra dark color right up into the nest. And now you can't tell where the nest stops and the background color starts. And we're just going to brush that out and let it fade away. And we've created a really simple, interesting shadow there. And that's really all there is to this little painting of a bird's nest. So I think I want to add one more thing. Now that we've got so much dark going on over there, I'm going to add just a little bit of a light twig with some burnt umber and a little bit of white, not too bright. So I'm mixing up a nice brown color. And I want to add just a little, I think that's still going to be a little light. I want to add just a little hint of a twig to break up some of that darkness down there. Just a little bit, doesn't have to be much. That's all it needs. All right, let's recap and go over some of the techniques that we covered in this little painting. The first thing we did was to create a graded background, and we used FolkArt Blending Gel to give us enough time to work with our paint so that we could have it go from dark to light. Then we established the nest with a dull aqua color and added a little background with the same sorts of color. Added a little bit of lightness to create contrast. We developed all of the twigs using first a brush to establish where the twigs would go, and then had a lot of fun using a palette knife just to add all of the little twigs. We added a pop of really bright orange for color contrast, and then anchored everything with some cast shadows. If you really want to improve your painting techniques, I would recommend that you paint a second canvas just like this within a week of painting your first one. You'll be amazed at how much faster and easier your second canvas is. You will reinforce all of the techniques from side loading to dry brushing, and it'll make you a much, much better painter. You're reinforcing the lessons that you've learned through the Skill Builder series as you paint this painting and each subsequent painting. I hope you enjoyed that. I had so much fun teaching you these great techniques, and I want to invite you to like and follow Plaid Crafts on all social channels so you never miss any of our videos for Let's Paint. See you next time.